The bell above the diner door jingled softly as the cold morning air slipped inside. Emily glanced up from the coffee station, wiping her hands on her apron. It was another quiet Tuesday at Charlie's Diner in rural Kentucky, a place where regulars came more for the conversation than the food. She saw him shuffle in, an elderly man in a faded army jacket, worn boots, and eyes that held too many memories. He moved slowly, like he carried more than just years on his back. With quiet respect, he chose the farthest booth, sat down, and folded his hands. Emily approached with a soft smile. "Morning, sir. Coffee to warm you up?" He nodded gently. "Yes, please, just that." As she poured the coffee, Emily couldn't help but notice how thin his fingers looked as he wrapped them around the cup. "You sure you don't want something to eat? Kitchen makes a mean stack of pancakes." He gave a faint smile. "Thank you, but no. Coffee's enough today." She hesitated, then leaned in a little. "I'll be honest. You look like you could use something more than caffeine." He glanced up. His voice was low and gravelly. "I'm fine, don't want to be a burden." Emily stood there for a second. She knew what it was like to go hungry. She'd been skipping her own meals more often than not, just to cover rent and save for nursing school. But something about him, the quiet dignity, the way he stared out the window like searching for something lost, tugged at her heart. Without another word, she walked to the counter, grabbed a plate, and told the cook, "Charlie, make one of the special breakfasts, extra bacon." Charlie frowned. "You know he's not paying for that, right? You're covering it again." She nodded. "Yeah, I've got it." She placed a few crumpled bills from her tip jar in the drawer and brought the plate over. "Here you go, sir," she said, sliding it in front of him. "How special." He blinked, surprised. "I didn't ask." "I know," she smiled. "You served us. Let someone serve you for a change." His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the fork. "Thank you, young lady. Not many folks notice anymore." "Maybe they don't look close enough," she said, topping off his coffee. He took a bite, then another. For a moment the years melted off his face. His eyes welled and he set the fork down. "I haven't tasted breakfast like this since before my wife passed. She used to make bacon just like this." He paused. "You've reminded me what kindness feels like." Emily's throat tightened. She just nodded, placing a hand gently on his shoulder before walking away to take another table's order. Later, as the man stood to leave, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small coin, old, brass, polished, and set it gently on the table. Then, with a small salute and a quiet, "Thank you, miss," he disappeared through the door. Emily walked over and picked up the coin. It was a military challenge coin, one of those, given for acts of honor, usually by commanding officers. She held it tightly in her palm, her eyes stinging. She didn't know his name, didn't know his rank, but something about the way he left it felt like a gift. Behind the counter, the manager raised an eyebrow. "You'll never get that money back, you know." She shrugged. "Wasn't about the money." But she had no idea that her act of kindness, quiet, small, and unpublicized, had already started a ripple that would reach far beyond that little booth. The next morning, everything would change. The next morning, Emily stepped into Charlie's Diner, with sleep still clinging to her eyes and her apron in hand. The same familiar hum of the coffee machine, the clinking of cutlery, and the slow trickle of early customers greeted her. Everything felt normal, until it didn't. At exactly 9:17 a.m., the bell above the door jingled louder than usual. Emily glanced up and froze. A line of sharply dressed men and women in military uniforms entered the diner in formation, at least 6 of them. Behind them followed 2 black SUVs, still idling outside, their drivers waiting. Every fork stopped mid-air. Conversations fell silent. One of the officers, a tall man with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, scanned the room with purpose. His chest bore rows of service medals, and his voice was crisp when he spoke. "We're looking for a waitress named Emily Parker." Emily blinked, her hands instinctively tightening around her notepad. That's me." All eyes in the diner turned toward her. The officer walked forward, holding a sealed envelope. "Emily, this is for you." She took it, hesitantly, heart pounding. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and had the emblem of the United States Army embossed in gold. Her fingers trembled as she opened it and read aloud. "Dear Emily, my name is Major General Arthur Dawson, retired. You knew me simply as an old man in a booth with a coffee cup. But yesterday, you gave me more than breakfast. You gave me dignity. You reminded me of the country I served and the kindness I fought for. I have not been treated with such compassion in a long time. Your small act shook me more than medals ever could. I've requested the Army honor you, in my name, for your selflessness and humanity. I hope this doesn't change you, only affirms the goodness you already live by. With deepest respect, Major General A. Dawson, Waitress." Emily's eyes were wide. "Major General?" The officer nodded. "He was one of our most decorated veterans. What you did meant a great deal to him. He contacted us within hours of leaving here." From behind another soldier, a second man stepped forward carrying a velvet box. "By order of the United States Army, and with the endorsement of Major General Dawson, we present you with the Medal of Civilian Kindness and Valor, a rare honor given to civilians who demonstrate extraordinary compassion." The entire diner erupted in applause. Emily covered her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. I just bought him breakfast." The officer smiled. "Sometimes the smallest things are the hardest to give, especially when they come from someone with little to spare. That's what makes them priceless." But the surprises weren't over. One of the soldiers handed her a second envelope. Inside was a document from the Veterans Education Foundation. It was a full scholarship to nursing school, funded entirely by a private donation, one that Emily could only assume came from General Dawson himself. She stood there stunned, surrounded by strangers in uniform who were now treating her like a hero. The same girl who could barely afford rent last week, now being offered a future she thought would take years to reach. Her manager stood speechless, unable to process what had just happened. The other customers clapped, some with tears in their eyes. A few even recorded the moment as local news outlets began arriving, tipped off by the Army's press office. Later that afternoon, after the uniforms were gone and the cameras packed away, Emily sat in the same booth where Dawson had once quietly eaten his breakfast. She looked down at the coin he'd left behind and smiled. What she thought was a one-time kindness had become the turning point of her life. And somewhere out there, a quiet general had reminded the world that small acts of goodness, even in dusty diners, can echo all the way to the highest ranks.